Joining me right now is Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. He sits on the Senate Armed Services and Joint Economic Committees. He is out with a book this November called Only the Strong that shows his strength in foreign policy. Senator, good to have you this morning. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Maria. It's always good to be back on with you.
Congratulations on the book. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, assess this trip, Joe Biden's trip to Asia, going to be in Tokyo today. What has been accomplished from your standpoint?
Well, Maria, unfortunately, I haven't seen many accomplishments yet. It's important for the president to visit our allies in the Western Pacific. I think it's coming about 16 months too late because China is the #1 threat we face. I wish President Biden had gone there early in his tenure, not spent so much time in Europe, not made his very first big glitzy international summit with Vladimir Putin last summer, for that matter. It's always important to talk to our allies and to visit with them, but what Xi Jinping and Chinese communists watch are actions. And unfortunately, Joe Biden's actions right now just are not backing up any words. China is still closing the gap with us militarily. They're gaining diplomatic grounds by opening potential port access in Western Pacific states where Joe Biden and his administration have been caught asleep at the switch. And they're still stealing our intellectual property and not living up to their trade obligations. If we want to get the upper hand on China, we need to take firmer action, not simply talk tough.
So what are they going to do, Senator? I'm told that there is a serious debate right now within the White House. The globalists are saying remove these tariffs on China. And Joe Biden is trying to make us believe that if he removes the tariffs on China, that's going to impact inflation rather than undoing some of his own policy that has brought us to 40-year highs. Are you expecting this administration to drop the tariffs on China?
Well, I think there's a lot of division inside the administration right now. On the one hand, they understandably don't want to be seen as weak on China, since Joe Biden has been weak on China going back decades. And just as recently as a couple years ago, he was still saying that China is not our main competitor and that China has no chance of beating us in that competition, even if he, like an ostrich, sticks his head in the sand. But on the other hand, they are deeply worried about inflation. Yet these tariffs didn't cause the inflation we see now, Maria. We had tariffs under the Trump administration. For that matter, we had a global pandemic under the Trump administration. We did not have inflation during the Trump era, though. That inflation only started when Joe Biden took office and poured trillions of dollars on an economy that was already recovering from that pandemic. So the president can blame tariffs on China or the pandemic, or for that matter, big oil or big meat or Vladimir Putin or anything else he wants for inflation. But the American people know that this inflation is the result of the Democrats' reckless policies.
And they continue trying to push portions of Build Back Better. It's almost like they have a tin ear. We know that we've got 40-year highs inflation. It's cutting into people's wages. We know that we haven't seen the worst in terms of gasoline because we haven't approached the summer driving months yet. And yet they still are trying to get portions of Build Back Better in other policies. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's really remarkable, Maria. They continue to push their ideological agenda of trillions of dollars of new taxes and new welfare spending rather than addressing the causes of inflation. Some of that goes back, again, to the trillions of dollars of tax and spending we saw last year. But take gas, for instance. One of the reasons gasoline costs so much right now is the Biden administration has waged a war on fossil fuel. This is not an accident. This is what Joe Biden promised in the campaign. This is what far left members of the Democratic caucus in Congress want. They want gas to cost $5, $6, $7 an hour because they want you out of your pickup truck or your minivan or your SUV driving electric cars or taking subways and trains to work. This is their intended goal. This is not an accident. What we should be doing is encouraging investors and industry to create more oil and gas and fossil fuel energy in America. These things take billions of dollars in investment and years to bring online, whether you're talking about oil and gas wells or pipelines or export facilities. And if the administration makes it clear that they are hostile to those investments, then it's not surprising that people are spending less money in the industry and therefore producing less oil and gas, driving up your price at the pump. This all goes back to the Democrats' war on fossil fuels.
Yeah, and we've got this graphic that we just showed, the inflation timeline, and inflation was at 1.4%, when Joe Biden walked into the Oval Office and on day one killed the Keystone Pipeline. Obviously, that was one of the most important impacts, sending the inflation rate all the way up to 8.3%, which was the last reading just last month. Senator, I want to ask you about your background in foreign policy, and of course, it is extensive. I love the fact that you graduated from law school and left and went into the military after 9/11. 9/11 impacted you so much that you joined the military, became an infantry officer, did tours in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and that's why I'm looking forward to the book in November. Talk to us about your decision to vote for the Ukraine package and the threats that we face today away from China. There's been a lot of debate. Some of your colleagues in the Senate, Rand Paul among them, say we should not be sending all of this money when we have inflation here and we don't have any money securing our own border.
Sure, Maria. Well, thank you for the kind words. I guess you could say maybe I redeemed myself after becoming a lawyer, quitting the law, and joining the army instead. But I think it's very important that we support the Ukrainians as they defend themselves against this war of aggression by Vladimir Putin. So first off, I do understand the reservations that some people had about that legislation, and there were some excessive or unnecessary measures. But a lot of that money went to support our own military and our own troops, to replenish the stockpiles of our weapons that those troops need to defend themselves and to protect our country, and not just support our allies in Europe, but also in the Western Pacific, Taiwan in particular. Second, I think it's very important that we help the Ukrainians fight their own war. This is much like what Ronald Reagan did with Afghanistan whenever Russia invaded that country in the 1980s. He didn't commit American troops. He didn't go to war with Russia, but he did support the Afghan people fighting back against the Russian invasion of that country. And finally, I think our main adversary, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, is watching very carefully what's happening in Europe. If they see the United States and our allies falter in our resolve to support Ukraine defending itself against an invasion of Russia, then I think Xi Jinping will believe that there's no way that we would actually come to the aid of Taiwan, because Xi Jinping will invade Taiwan in the next 5 years if the United States does not take strong action to deter it. That starts in part by showing him that we have the resolve to help Ukraine to the end, especially after the debacle in Afghanistan, which only emboldened people like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin.
That's a great point. Will Sweden and Finland join the NATO alliance, and do you expect some pushback from Russia?
They've applied to join NATO. I welcome their application. These are both advanced, highly technological economies. They have very capable militaries that have often worked with NATO in exercises in the past. Frankly, their militaries are probably better than half, maybe 2/3 of current NATO countries. They also add critical terrain that complicates Russia's defense planning. Finland has an 800-mile border with Russia. Finland has a long history of standing up to Russian aggression going back to the Winter War of 1939 and 1940, which is still something that both Russians and Finns remember very, very deeply. They helped him in the Baltic Fleet in the Gulf of Finland. Gotland, a giant island in the Baltic Fleet that Sweden controls, is like an unsinkable aircraft carrier up there. So these two countries joining NATO strongly contribute to NATO and therefore American security. And then finally, I would also add, Maria, that they have Nokia and Ericsson, two of the only real competitors to Chinese telecom companies. So that's another reason to welcome them into our alliance as we try to counteract China's economic mercantilism around the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, today there's a story Apple is considering taking production elsewhere away from China as well. So you're feeling this issue is becoming more important across the world. Senator, good to see you. I know Iran is still a big concern of yours. We will talk about that next time. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton joining us this morning. We appreciate it, sir. Thank you.